We have a ghost.
Yeah, what's that?
So Al's like, yeah, Al can't take it anymore.
Done working.
And another,
Another meeting.
Right.
Quite an endorsement.
all right, I'm gonna start over again. So welcome to this meeting of the Megunticook River Citizens Advisory Committee. Welcome everyone, welcome back. Thank you for accommodating the change in schedule. We have a really cool meeting today with a presentation from Dave Saint Laurent, who's gonna help us understand a little bit more about stormwater issues in Camden. We'll also have a second discussion that dovetails really with the presentation from Dave with Alison McKellar and Susan Todd to talk about Harbor Park and what we're talking about there. Then we'll have an overall review of the grant, how we're doing it, what's happening there, and questions of the public. So busy agenda. But the first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of our December meeting. Did everybody have a chance to review the minutes? Any edits?
At LP, we did make the edit that you asked for.
Okay,
Yeah, I saw things.
does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
Tonight,
Okay,
much more Courtney's name is not spelled right.
Really?
Oh my
It's
god.
not a big deal.
No, I'm so sorry.
No, it is, and it's spelled right in one place, but not in another.
I am going to double, yeah. Thank you, Deb. Keep me honest.
It's on
I'm
the
sorry,
short,
Courtney.
the short-term action list.
That, I must have never fixed it, okay.
We put that
I
in
will
there
fix that
to see if you guys are paying attention.
Yeah.
It's very good of you.
well, it works. All right. Does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes with the edits that Julia will make and the edits from LPs?
So move.
Second, all in favor? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the motion carries. Let's put in the minutes that Seth could not be with us today, so. All right, Audra, you want to give us a town manager update?
I really don't have much to report for this update. We are starting, conversations about requesting an extension for the grant project. So we have 45 days from when, it's called a period of performance ends, 45 days back from that to ask for an extension. So we need to request one by mid-February. So we're gonna kind of nail down what we believe would be a reasonable amount of time to request that for.
And just to piggyback on this is something we knew from the beginning of the grant. We knew that we would need to request an extension just because of administrative issues with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation that we would, it's nothing unusual. Excellent. Anything else? Yes, yes.
How long an extension? Any idea?
I don't think we've nailed it down, at least a year, could be a little bit longer.
A year or longer? Okay, thank you.
All right, Dave? Can we give the floor to you?
Sure. Okay, so I'm gonna stand up because it's kind of,
Yeah,
it's
stand
easier
up.
for me to talk when I'm standing. I don't know why, it's just what happens. So
We have, hold on a sec, we have about 15 minutes for this discussion altogether.
15 minutes, 50 minutes for this?
5 votes.
Oh, my God.
Well, counting the questions.
Okay.
Good questions.
We'll have a lot.
So,
But if
here's
Okay,
the
I
meat
think
of
I
our
can do
meeting.
So I guess before I start, one of the things that I talked about last time, I gave this presentation to Camden Can. Is there a microphone or the owls didn't hear it?
You're doing it.
Okay, so one of the things I talked about before I started, does anybody know what one of the biggest complaints I get in Camden is?
I was all in campus.
Oh, you can't say it, you can't say it. Honestly, this is the one I get hands down most complaints about throughout the year. It's,
The weather,
no, it's stormwater problems on people's personal property and private property. So, I mean, rarely a week goes by where I don't get a call from somebody. And they call me up and they're like, I have this puddle in my yard. And they wanna know, what I can do to fix it. And the reality is that, you know, with all these increased rainfall events and the amount of rainfall that we're getting, puddles in your yard are just a reality that people are gonna live with, so it's okay to have a puddle in your yard. If you leave it there, it's probably gonna disappear in a day or so. I have a puddle in my yard, but the reality is everybody here probably is gonna have a puddle in your yard at some point in time of the year, and you don't need a drain in your yard to drain the puddle, because that's basically gonna put it in the stormwater collection system, which is already overtaxed, and then put it in the river, which is gonna contribute to sea level rise, okay? And I'm gonna talk a little bit about how all this is kind of interconnected and how I see it from my perspective, because I'm in charge of, responsible for, you know, a lot of the infrastructure in town. So it's the, you know, the public works department, all the roads, all the stormwater collection system, the sewer system, and I'm also run the transfer station. So, and the dams. So I have a pretty good perspective of like how water affects everything in town Camden and how it's all interconnected. But the kind of the theme of all my presentation is all about water and how water impacts us and how we have to kind of adapt and make changes before we go and put, you know, major amounts of capital and infrastructure in place that's just going to ultimately get destroyed. We don't look at it. So these slides are just to kind of help me kind of talk with you and everything, not really anything I'm going to read verbatim. And I just put this together before we talk, so I didn't really spend a lot of time about it. I'm really just gonna talk about my experience and what I'm seeing. So everybody knows that 2023 was the warmest year on record. So like I said before, the genie's kind of out of the bottle when it comes to climate change and stormwater or sea level rise or inland flooding. Areas. Okay. Okay, I got it. Yeah. So the important part of this slide is, you know, the annual rainfall statewide is about 45 inches and mid-coast Maine is about 60 inches. So that kind of shows, you know, the difference that we're seeing just here immediately in the mid-coast. Stormwater trends, you know, we're seeing 3 times 4-inch storms are 3 times more common. 3-inch storms are 3.5 times more common, and 2-inch storms are 2 times more common. So normally we would see, you know, a rain that would kind of gradually, you know, take place over a period of time. Now we're seeing it all happening within a 24-hour period, and it just overwhelms everything. So this is kind of what I was talking about a little bit before. I actually just pulled this off a slide. I was taking part in global warming resiliency webinar that they had today with
Urban Institute?
Island Institute, that's right. So I actually stole the slide today from them. So it was kind of interesting, so I figured I'd throw it in, but it talks about how, you know, how we have the storm surge and then we have the tides, but what also people forget is about all the inland flooding that happens. And the inland flooding is contributing to the stormwater, to the sea level rise that we're seeing kind of here in Camden. So, you know, you just think about it, you know, the earth is warming, polar ice caps are melting, the water's expanding, it's taking up more space, and then you have all this melting and rain events that's happening in the wintertime. Well, normally you would have seen this be frozen precipitation that would, you know, gradually melt until springtime. So it's all kind of happening at once. So you see you have that melting and winter storms, the extreme high tides, and the storm surges all coming together, causing this coastal flooding. So I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about the sewer system and the collection system associated with sewage. And everybody knows that basically you have everybody's who's tied into the public sewer collection system. Their water basically goes through the collection system through a series of manholes and then makes its way down to the treatment plant where it's treated, and then it's sent down to the harbor where it's discharged. the problem that we're seeing is that our collection system is extremely old. It's made of materials that are broken or degraded over time. So what we're finding is a lot of the placement of the collection system is kind of below the water level now. And normally it used to be, you know, above the water level. So with it being compromised, it's becoming this sink for water, groundwater. And it's basically ending up at the treatment plant. When you have that additional I&I influent infiltration going to the treatment plant, you're basically just really increasing your cost of treatment. You're spending more money on energy, because one of the most expensive things that you can pay for in a community is your treatment plant, because you use a huge amount of power to generate compressed air. What we aerate the tanks with is just really, really expensive. So the more water you have, the more aeration you need, the more chemicals you need, the more pumping that you do. So you just use a lot more energy and resources that costs you more. The other side of that is, you know, your collection system and your treatment plant is designed to handle a certain amount of flow. And, you know, they say you can put X amount of water through the systems, you know, wastewater through the system. But the reality is it's a biological system and it likes things to move through slowly. It doesn't like these big surges of water moving through it. What happens is when you get these big surges of water moving through it, it doesn't treat as well. So that's, you know, that's one of the drawbacks to this I&I. But another one is it may not even reach the treatment plant. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. And yeah, that's the yacht club and that's not clean water, okay? And that's Fry Street and that's not clean water. And that's Bayview Street and that's not clean water. This is sewage, untreated water, basically running out of the manhole, not even making it to the pump station because the pump station can't handle it. Neither can the pipe that's bringing it to the pump station. So basically it's going into the harbor, it's going into buildings, and it's a problem. And it's all attributed to this increase in rainfall events that we're seeing. And the change in how everything is kind of in place in the ground, how much water is taking in the aging system. So my next part, I'm going to talk a little bit about public works here and how our road infrastructure is being impacted by these increased stormwater events. So back when, you know, towns were formed, one of the most important positions in the town was the road commissioner. Everything is about the roads. Everything was about the roads then, because roads were how you connected everybody. Roads were how you got to different places. If you didn't have roads, you didn't have a town. And today they still are one of the most important parts of our infrastructure. And they're extremely expensive to maintain, and they're extremely expensive to rebuild, especially with this new stormwater or significant rainfall events that we're seeing. So this right here is a result of a significant rainfall event. On the left is Rollins Road. And that basically just washed out that whole left side of the road. And you say, oh, well, you know, you can just kind of put some top in there and fix that. Well, you can't, because that's actually a stormwater drainage ditch right there on the left, and it's eaten underneath the road. We basically have to cut this road at the center line, take all that material out, put aggregate down in, put hot top over it and rebuild the whole thing. And that's expensive when you do that. This other picture on the right is Melvin Heights. So this is a good example of how significant rainfall events and them happening later in the season during the winter months, how this is having an impact on the road system. So normally at this time of year, it's all snow, everything's frozen. We plow the roads, we wing it off to the side. It'll melt a little bit and then drain off the shoulder and run into the ditch and then go into the stormwater system that makes it to the river. Now what we're seeing is the ground's not completely frozen. We will plow the road on one day, which will create this little windrow of ice and snow along the edge. And then, you know, the next day it'll rain and go up to 35, 40 degrees, and the water will just run down the edge of the road up against the snowbank. And eat away at that edge right there that you see, that's about this deep right here that you can't really tell. All along the edge of the road on Melvin Heights. And we had hundreds of feet of this. This is extremely expensive to fix. And if you don't get to it soon enough, what happens is it also undermines the road like it did on Rollins Road on the left. And then we basically got to cut all that out and rebuild it. So it gets really expensive to do this, and this isn't something we saw before. This is just something we're seeing more now because the winter times aren't as cold. We have more significant rainfall events, not snow events in the winter, and things aren't quite frozen anymore. And this right here is really, really expensive because asphalt, is made of petroleum, and petroleum is expensive. So this is another storm. Everything I'm showing you has happened in the past 3 years, okay? So look at the person on the left. This just shows the magnitude and the power of stormwater runoff and what it can do to a road. This is Route 52. Probably everybody's driven by here. I mean, that's some serious damage. You didn't see this stuff before. I don't think anybody's seen that anytime recent. Of course, we were fortunate that this was a state road and the state had to pay for it. But guess what? We're paying for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I bet.
So I had to throw this in because I'm originally from Lewiston. And my father's actually on one of these monuments here, but this is the Veterans Memorial in Lewiston, and this area is normally way underwater. And you can just see that, the damage that this last storm had just recently done. And, we were spared by this last storm. We didn't really have a lot of damage over here. But all you have to do is look elsewhere in the state of Maine. It decimated the state. I mean, this is probably the one storm that we didn't get walloped with. But then just, a few months later, we got a coastal flooding. So we escaped this by the skin of our teeth. But if we would have got this and the coastal flooding, it would have gone all over. You guys, it wouldn't have been any fun. So we need to really start preparing for this kind of stuff. And that's, building infrastructure that's resilient in a way that can handle this new environment, this new weather pattern that we're in. And that isn't about just building bigger and stronger. It's building it in a way where, the water can naturally move through without having a lot of, brick and mortar in place to take care of that. You want it to be able to work its way through the system without damaging everything. And we don't want to be putting things in the way that are just going to get damaged and have to be rebuilt. So I'm gonna move on to dams now. So this was one of the storms that we didn't avoid. And this was pretty scary. This was about a little over a year ago. And I had been watching the weather, and it was Saturday, and it said, we're gonna get 1 to 2 inches of rain. And I said, oh, okay, I'm gonna go over and open up the dam on Sunday morning. I went over and opened up the west dam Sunday morning. I said, I'm not even gonna bother with the east dam, and it's only 1 inch of rain, and we got 5 inches of rain. Okay, and then that morning I got up and, I get over there and I'm trying to open up the east dam, and the trash rack, which is, probably about 200 feet upstream of the east dam itself. Basically it's a grate, and it's meant to catch trash and logs and stuff. It had been completely blocked off by canoes and kayaks and logs, and it had actually become a dam itself. And the water was a foot higher on the trash rack side than it was on the dam side, which raised the whole lake level another foot. And this was pretty scary. So you can see how all this is going over the dam at this point. And it was working its way around the wing wall of the dam. And when that starts happening, that's when you start beginning to have dam failure. And this really isn't a high hazard dam, but in all reality, it should be, because there's a lot of water behind these two dams right here. And if they were to let go, you'd see a huge flooding event, in the town itself. It could blow out the Seabright Dam. So I was so nervous about this, I actually, I enacted the emergency response plan, even though that's for the high hazard dam.
That is high hazard. West Dam's high hazard.
Okay, well, yeah, you're right. I enacted the emergency action plan, and we were monitoring this. We were notifying people of the flooding that was gonna happen, because I was worried that this could have actually failed and then, flooded the whole downtown. This was pretty scary. So how, I mean, Allison makes a good point. Does anybody know what high hazard dam basically means? It's basically, it's a dam that if it does fail, it could result in, loss of life or public property, yeah. So.
And you said those aren't classified as?
They are. I mean,
And Seabright too.
Seabright, we are, yeah,
East West.
yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk about here is that, we have a lake level policy. But the lake level policy, it's probably the best it can be. But the reality is it was more designed to accommodate predictable storm events. And now that storm events aren't so predictable, it makes it hard to manage, the water. Like if you think you have an inch of rain coming and you get 5, you really have no way of draining the lake to make room for all that water. And so the east and west dam both have a really small dam, and it's really, you can't really see the water's coming out over here, but it's the dam gate is this big. Okay, so the dam gate is like this, and it's like that, so it's that high, it's that wide. So the opening this big is what we're trying to drain. There's 2 of them, I'll say, there's 2 of them, but this is what we're trying to drain the whole lake with to make preparation for a 5-inch storm event in 24-hour period. So it's not really even possible. You can't do it. So years ago, we'd be able to prepare for hurricanes because you could see them coming up through the coast and, you'd say, all right, here comes a hurricane, it's, 4 or 5 days away, and you could drain the lake, and every couple of days with everything open and no extra water, you could drop the lake level 2 inches a day. Well, you can't do that when you find out the day before you're gonna get 5 inches of rain. You just can't do it. So the reality is, this is a good example of how this infrastructure really isn't designed to handle this new type of climate that we're in. Really, this whole thing should be a spillway and should be able to accommodate water once it gets to, the set level that it needs to be, so the water can just flow over the top. There doesn't need to be an actual gate. That's really what we should have. It's more like the Seabright Dam is. And the same thing with the West Dam. So that's one way to kind of make, this system more resilient, but not so reliant on, intervention from us and, opening and closing the dam gate. Okay. So the other part that I'm responsible for is the dump, and people got a kick out of this one. So, years ago, they said, hey, we were in the lime industry and we had Rockport, we had these big quarries where we were mining the limestone. And then we had this big hole left over, and they're like, hey, I got an idea, let's fill this with garbage. They thought that was a good idea. But it wasn't. So then when the garbage, got higher, they said, well, we gotta stop burning the garbage. So they started burning the garbage, and then everybody's like, whoa, we don't like the burning garbage. So they said, okay, well, maybe what we'll do is so the garbage was floating on the water. So they decided, well, let's dynamite the floating, burning garbage.
Oh, wow.
And then after they did that, they realized that wasn't working, and then they tried throwing boulders and things on it to sink the floating garbage, but, none of that really worked. So eventually they filled the quarry to the point where there was no more water, so they kind of had solved that part of the problem, but, we were still left with this quarry, 150, 200 feet deep, full of garbage. And, the state basically outlawed dumps and unlined landfills, and they made a rule called the Rockland Rule, and it exempt basically Camden, Rockport, and Rockland because the legislature overruled the findings of the DEP that it wasn't a good thing to fill a hole full of garbage that was exposed to the groundwater. So they let them, for political reasons, they let them continue filling it. And then they said, well, if you're gonna do that, we're gonna make sure it doesn't contaminate the groundwater. So we ended up having to pump the water down from the landfill. And we were actually doing that from the north quarry, the open quarry that you see over at the landfill. And then they were like, well, we don't want you dragging the old dirty water into the clean water in the other quarry, so you're gonna install a pump. And right now, we have a pump that's installed in the actual landfill. So the big mound that you see, there's a pipe and it goes all the way to the bottom. And there's a pump that hangs down inside there and it pumps, anywhere from 30 to 50 gallons a minute. And that's 24/7, 7 days a week. So why am I talking about this during the stormwater thing? Because more water means more pumping. More pumping means more cost for the town. Because we have to maintain an inward gradient flow so we don't contaminate the groundwater in the area. So, that can cost us anywhere from $250,000 to $300,000 a year to pump water from the landfill forever. So.
Where does it go?
Where does it go?
So that's a good point, that's a good question. So it goes to the Camden wastewater treatment plant, which already has too much water going to it during significant rainfall events. So you can see how this is all connected, right? And that's even if it makes it to the treatment plant, because it actually, that line that you see at Bayview Street, that's actually where the line goes through, and that water's pumped from there and actually before it gets to the treatment plant. So you can see how all these things are connected, and the theme here is that significant rainfall events because of climate change is contributing to our overall cost and our need for looking at how we handle our infrastructure in the future. So when you're thinking about making investments in the public infrastructure, what has to be done is you need to think about the situation we're in, how climate change is affecting everything. And we really want to put our money into resilient infrastructure, not just brick and mortar stuff that's going to create a lot of upkeep and a lot of cost, and it's going to be susceptible to damage. So that's what this is all about. All these relic dams are beautiful, they're great, it's a nice thing to think about, but the reality is it's not going to last. And we're fooling ourselves to think that, the type of infrastructure we have now is going to be able to withstand all of this over time, because it's only going to get more frequent and worse and more difficult to maintain. So that's one of the things you really probably ought to be thinking about as part of what you're doing now, I think, in our river committee, that you're looking at those things, I know, and I'm hopeful that you come up with some good solutions. I'm trying to think if there's, let's see what else we got here. That's it.
I think it'd be great to open it up for questions.
Yeah.
So let's open it up to questions on Dave's presentation or stormwater system. Who has a question? All right, Susan and then Helen.
So my question is, if you were to change the gates and the sluiceways on the east and west dam and enlarge them, do you think that that will affect flooding in town because you're letting more water through?
I think you have to look at all the dams all the way down
Right.
through. So the reality is you just can't look at one dam, you have to look at all of them. I think the Seabright Dam has got the best potential for being able to handle this kind of stuff because it has a really big spillway. But, the bridge, the Montgomery Dam, and the East and West Dam all have room for improvement for being able to handle this kind of thing. Bigger spillway, allowing the water to just kind of move through, not trying to hold it back. Dealing with our stormwater, building buffers, not just putting everything in a pipe and sending it into the river, that's part of this. It's all interconnected. When you're looking at development, impermeable surfaces, every time we make the town bigger and build more and take up that precious space that can take up water and let it get into the ground, we're basically moving water quickly to the river. And when you move water quickly to the river, you're making these dams less effective and more vulnerable. So you have to look at this whole thing holistically. That's one of the reasons why, one of the reasons why my job has kind of evolved into more of an oversight of all of the departments. Because you need somebody to look at it holistically, because they're all interconnected. before, you know, the wastewater person looked at the wastewater. Public works person looked at the public works part of it, you know. Nobody looked at it holistically. I look at these things holistically, and one of the first things I think about is, you know, is there a way of getting this water kind of to get into the ground and percolate through and slowly make its way to the river, as opposed to just putting it in a pipe and sending it there? I mean, Pearl Street, I really wanted to put a permeable pavement down. It didn't work out because it was, and I'm glad I didn't, because it's basically a very, very wet area, and it would have probably come up through the permeable pavement. But, you know, funny thing is, when we dug up Pearl Street, we were only gonna be doing, you know, half of it. And at the time, there was somebody else that was in charge of the wastewater part. I was doing the stormwater and the road part. And we ended up digging it up, and we found that basically the whole road was, you know, all the infrastructure and all the stormwater lines were just cracked and broken, and there was all kinds of stormwater catch basins tied into the sewer system. A lot of people's sump pumps and cellar drains and roof drains were going into the sewer system. So, and then everything, all the groundwater was going into the sewer system. So we put a really tight pipe and replaced all of that. Then all of a sudden we had all this water. We're like, all right, what are we gonna do all this water now? So then we had to put it in the stormwater system, which is adding to the water going into the river. That's kind of a trade-off in all of this. You have to triage kind of what needs to be done first, and then really think through where the extra water is gonna be going, and, you know, making buffers and creating spaces for this wetlands and this, and places for the water to actually go before it actually gets to the river will be as wise, you know, when we're doing any of this planning.
Are there any areas in town where you think we could put a permeable surface, like some of the parking areas, you know, fire department or?
Sure, you know, I mean, a big part of it is what's underneath the surface. So, you know, this area has a lot of clay and ledge. So, you know, you don't have a lot of space for that water to kind of move down through. It can move stuff through just a very, very narrow window of material, and then it either hits clay or it's ledge, and then works its way through and bubbles up in someone's yard, and they call me and they're like, I got a puddle in the yard. I'm like, what are we gonna do? So, you know, there are places for it. You know, we'll do test pits, you know, build rain gardens, create buffers, don't go and expand areas with wetlands in them. This infill that you see going on in people's yards, like everybody buying a wet piece of property and they're filling it in. Well, every time you do that, you're forcing the water to another location and it has no place to naturally go. You know, Pearl Street, basically a big wetland, I think, at one point in time. I don't think it was, you know, really as dry as it looks now. We dug that up, and we actually found an eel in the sewer line that, you know, that probably got in there from the bog. I mean, that's how interconnected all of this is. It was just one big wetland in that area. I'm thinking Camden once upon a time had a lot more wetlands in the area than you realize.
Sure.
So we have, hold on,
Sure.
we have Ellen first and then Ray
Okay.
and Forrest.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you felt like it was a good idea to, make much larger spillways for the east and west dam.
Mhm.
Would that be something that remediates the need for a gate at all, or would that be in addition to, would there still be a gate component?
I mean, I think, you know, as a precautionary measure, you always want to probably have a gate in place, but it isn't meant to be a gate that you're manning, and, you know, like I go almost every day and look at
So a lot less.
yeah, you're not gonna, I mean, what I would think you would want is to establish a lake level that basically meets the requirements or the needs of everybody in the area, but when the water, you know, when we get these significant rainfall events, it allows much more water to move through the system without creating damage. And that's something that an engineer would calculate out. You know, a lot of people will think about that and come up with the best solution to make sure. I think that the actual work that you're doing is working on just that. That's what the intent here is, to kind of look at that holistically and figure out, okay, what does this dam need to be? How wide does it, you know, how wide does the spillway have to be to kind of safely move a 5-inch storm that comes in a 24-hour period through the whole watershed and into the ocean without damaging everything. I think that's the goal here.
My question is basically answered.
Excellent. Forrest, and then Elfie.
Yeah, sure. I guess, a little bit of a statement and then a question. Julia and Bina and I were fortunate, we were able to meet with the New Hampshire State climatologist, you've heard me say this many times, last week. And her message was, when I asked the question, are the models too conservative, the models of precipitation levels and sea level rise? And she said, yes, they're too conservative. I said, what can we do in communities to help communities? She said they need to look at, where the curve is going this way instead of this way, the higher emissions, the higher temperatures, the greater precipitation events. So that's a message to everybody that the models are off. And unfortunately, they're probably off in the wrong direction. What I loved hearing you say, and thank you for saying it, is you talked about the need for more natural stream channels and flow paths. And that, I think that's a concept a lot of people don't think about. A lot of people think it's a coastal issue, but it is definitely an inland flooding issue. And so, helping communities think proactively, is important. And there's a group in the White Mountains, several municipalities that are working to raise $100 million to make hundreds of culverts able to withstand the 100-year flood event. So really thinking 20 years down the road instead of 2 years of being reactive. So I guess I didn't have a question at all. I guess I just had some important stuff to say, and thank you for noticing.
I think everybody, or not everybody, but I think what people think sometimes is they see something get destroyed and they're like, oh, we gotta fix it. And we wanna fix it back to what it was,
Or bigger.
or bigger. But the reality is that's not always a solution,
Elfie.
Okay, so I understand the connection between a big rain event and a storm surge and storm drains, like your pictures. What I don't understand is the connection between a large weather event and sea level rise.
So I'm not an expert, but like I was saying, sea level rise is a result of, global warming, right? Global warming basically is melting polar ice caps. And then the water itself is warming, which makes the water expand in size, so it's taking up more area.
Okay.
But you also have more water. And then you have things that aren't freezing, which is creating more storm events. And they're contributing to inland flooding, so you have the coastal flooding taking up more space and with more water, and then you have more precipitation coming in and working its way to the ocean, contributing. So those are three contributing factors making the sea level rise.
So in a watershed that doesn't have the drop that we have, that seems like it would be even more of an issue in a watershed that, what's the word I'm looking for, goes through.
Flat, like a delta.
Yeah.
I can probably comment on that too. So so Camden Harbor has a certain resistance to letting water out of it. It's pretty low, but I mean, there's structures that impede, like shallow areas.
You're talking about the harbor?
The harbor itself.
Okay.
So as you dump water into the harbor, it can only flow, it has a certain resistance to allowing water to flow out of it.
Oh.
I think I heard.
It's very low. But what you will see when you have a high water event, as you get closer to the falls, that area has a higher resistance, and as it spreads out in the harbor. So what you'll actually see is if you had a 5-inch rain event that lines up with other things, you'll actually see a water level rise locally from the ocean, probably like 3 inches, right near the falls.
Okay.
And tapering out probably once you get out to Middle Harbor, it's there still, but it's so small at that point.
Huh.
So it adds to things, and it may not be adding a lot, but if you add another inch to things, where the public landing is, or 1.5 inches or 2 inches on the closer end of public landing, or where the harbor park is.
Okay.
So it's just another compounding thing.
So
I think they're
before we
figuring
have-
it out.
Courtney, you wanted to say something? And then Rick, and then Allison.
It was yours related to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mine is-
Okay, a little bit.
so Tyler, if we dredge the harbor and make it a little bit deeper, we'll see effect there. Does that help?
Yeah, it would help for that particular
right.
thing, yeah.
There's the state geologist is gonna be speaking at the planning board meeting on the 15th. And he's really good with the complex sea level rise stuff. It's about, I've heard some of this stuff said, but I don't really understand it either. And heard somebody say the other day, there was a thermal expansion aspect of it with the influx of the warm, fresh water that can, and then the incoming tide when it corresponds with a big rain event that not being able to get out.
I think Rockport Harbor's a great one to see it, especially where you have a very narrow constrained where the Goose River comes into it. You will get like almost a foot elevation gain of the local water at the put-in in Rockport from the Goose River during high water.
Is that measured somewhere? Or is that just, are you eyeballing it or?
Yeah, you can see it. It's like so significant that you can see it.
So,
But it's very
let's-
constrained. I mean, it's a very constrained, there's structures in the way,
But so this is a really important point, and I think, the idea that the river, the harbor, the wastewater, all of those systems are interconnected, and we need to understand more the relationship between sea level rise and the river. I think that's something we need to find an expert for. It's a question that's recurring and people are trying to grapple with. So because we don't have an expert here to talk about it, I think we should table this, but make sure we find someone who can address those questions because they're really, really important. And they keep coming up, the relationship between sea level rise and the river. Other questions? Courtney and then Ellen.
I had a question about the culvert situation. So it looks like I looked at the culvert flood risk explorer. Have you seen that? My team phase, right? So you can go on and go to Camden and find out which culverts are high risk for flooding, et cetera. It looks like there's a few, and one is right, it's near it's the Seabright Dam. It's on, I just had it here. Mount Batty Street. So it was just an example that I saw that I thought, oh, are there any culverts that are at high risk because of,
That's
because
just,
of, like,
that is a
more-
huge culvert. I mean, that's,
Okay.
yeah. I
Even
mean,
though
that
it's huge.
culvert is, but if you think about it, you have, all the Seabright Dam water moving across it, and theoretically, I guess it could overwhelm that culvert. That was just recently replaced. Maybe.
Are you talking about the Mount Batty Street Bridge?
I think
The
that's-
bridge,
I
the
think
double
that's
belt
what she's
there?
talking about.
I think they've identified that as a possible commercial fish passage barrier.
Okay.
But there are
that's
a
the
bunch
question.
that are-
we looking at, for our committee, should we be looking at culverts as well in that
Oh, yeah.
area? And do you
Rossman Ave.
recommend do you have any recommendations for us in terms of?
Like Lawson Ave and Mount Batty.
Yeah, and part of the work that Interfluid is doing, that's included, so that's all part of it, Rossin Ave, Washington Street.
Belmont.
So there's an analysis on kind of the
You
relevant
can chime in,
culverts.
Allison.
This is, one of the things the Conservation Commission has been doing is mapping out the stormwater system and then GIS database that can be edited by, citizens. So a big part of the potential benefit here also would be some of these interconnecting streams, like the one, that comes from the bog down behind Pearl Street, underneath, the parking lot behind Eric's Barber Shop. That is a very undersized culvert that they're supposed to be evaluating, and really by it would be the more citizen input we can get, the better, but that would be a candidate for stream daylighting, for instance, because it always overflows when it gets to the underground part. There are a few others identified in the grant documentation, but I could write that up and send it, and we have them all mapped out in the system. So they're
Really good to know, yeah.
yeah. There are also some coming into the river that are washing out, like
because there's more and more water coming through and it blows out you see the river turns completely brown in some places. And that's because a lot of the time the outfall from these culverts, like at the new middle school, for instance, water comes, they only designed it for a certain amount of water and a lot more is coming through. So you don't see riprap and stones anymore. You just see this like gully. So that would be a great thing for committee members, just to walk along the river too and start identifying some of these places. Because money could be used, if it's part of a larger project, money could be used to improve all of those things that connect to the river also, even on private property, so.
So if you look here, this is what. So this right here this is what Allison's talking about right now, so. Give it a minute, so basically. The green is the sewer collection system. And the purple is the stormwater collection system. And then you can see how this is all the tributaries and everything, where there isn't a collection system, you either have a tributary or you have a ditch that will take the water to basically either the river or the ocean. And just everything, that's what we're talking about when we talk, I mean, just look at the series of, infrastructure that you just don't even see that's on the ground. And this is what's just being overwhelmed right now with all this water.
I do want to remind the group though, I mean, I think according to the intergroup study and like that, while this seems very large, the amount of acreage draining into the river from this system compared to the rest of the Megunticook watershed is, I mean, I think they basically said it's in the noise, like it's not even, they don't even factor this portion into their model, because it's.
Because of the lake,
So
the lake
insignificant.
watershed.
The lake watershed is so large. That basically,
This is not contributing.
as far as their models are concerned, yeah, there's a lot of pipes coming into the river, but it's not even affecting flow.
Right, although you could argue from a pollutant standpoint, it's.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely, yeah, that's a different
This
conversation.
is where all it's coming from, basically. The watershed is actually clean water.
Correct, yeah, that's a different conversation, yeah.
I mean, when the watershed's so great that when we had that significant rainfall, that when we got 5 inches of rain, the lake basically came up almost this much in like a day, the whole lake. So you can just imagine, that's a lot of water. And that's kind of what
Allison.
Tyler's saying.
That's definitely true, but you can look back in many of the Camden Heralds, and I could send lots of articles, including the October 31st storm. That was, what was that, 2021? That we had tons of flooding, behind the Montgomery Dam, Smiling Cow, all of that, people calling, asking to open up gates. That was, the lake gates were completely closed during that entire time and weren't opened until the complete end of the storm. So we do get enough rain on this side of the lake. A lot of the time there was a storm in 1915 and the whole town was torn apart, but they said it would have been so much worse if the lake had been higher at the time. So depending on where the lake is, a lot of the time those gates can stay closed for the entire storm. And then you're protecting the downtown from all of the water from the watershed on that side of the lake. But we still have had a bunch of times where flooding, like Rawson Avenue was overflowing on October 31st.
Yeah, I think certainly if the lake's drawn down, I think that's a factor. But I think even the gates, even conversation with Interfluid about the gates let so little water through that whether the gates are open or closed.
It's planning for the water.
It's a planning thing. There's a
You
planning.
have to get the water, like right now, we're supposed to be like 20 to 25 inches below the spillway.
Yeah,
And that's in case we get a bad rainfall event. But in all reality, I almost could be lower than that to really try to avoid the flooding that you would get from the watershed itself.
right.
Like Rawson Avenue is not even in the flood zone, for instance. And I could show you pictures twice a year of Rawson Avenue overtopping not because of the Megunticook River normally, but because of the little tributary that comes in.
Mhm.
And it's just missed by all the models
Yeah.
for some reason, so there's still a lot to be.
What's really scary is like, we have a rainfall event and we've made room in the lake, and then it comes up 2 feet within 2 or 3 days, and then we get another back-to-back storm and another rainfall event with a coastal flooding at the same time. That's, we've been just lucky because we're really coming close to these things overlapping. And that's the part that makes me nervous, because there isn't anything we can do.
Hold on.
Okay.
Courtney wanted to say something.
I just had a question about the FEMA flood maps. We know that they're not incorporating the future predictions, really, so they're underestimating everything, and I know they're being updated this summer, which is really good news. Is that something that we're anticipating and we're gonna be working, like, as a town, we're gonna be looking at that again, or is there some kind of upcoming review planned, or I guess Interfood hopefully will be doing that update, but.
That's
That's a good question for Jeremy, but the FEMA flood maps also, what's always emphasized to me is that they don't incorporate any blockages. So that's like all conditions being equal, nothing gets trapped, but most of the time, the majority of damage in a storm is done by things getting stuck, debris forming. And then, like, that's what happened in 1922 in Camden, all the stuff got stuck in the bridge, water overtopped it, a building fell down and had to cut the bridge open.
Daily Brook, Route 1, bunch of hay bales fell in and flooded the culvert, and then it almost came over Route 1. That was just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Yeah.
But there's indirect effects through permitting and zoning and building abilities.
Jeremy keeps saying he's gonna be doing some big, obviously not here, is she?
There's a big main flood risk checklist that I know Jeremy has on his radar, in terms of making sure that Camden is ready for flooding. And once you do this checklist, I know it sounds silly to do a checklist, but it sets you up for funding. And so you guys did it. And so I know that he's trying to follow up to make sure what happens next and what maps do we need to include. And I just wanted to quickly remind that, like, we do have a whole thing on flooding on the MERCAC website. And I think it does a good job of outlining storm surge and coastal flooding and rain events and how they play together to see the scenarios that are seen here today.
Sure, go ahead.
I know I'm kind of asking an obvious question, Dave, but so a big part of your job is to watch the weather and trust the predictions?
Oh,
to
God,
do
yeah.
How do you do that?
It drives me crazy, because, I mean, even 5 years ago, the weather was much more predictable. I mean, I'd look at the weather and be like, oh, okay, it's gonna snow. Now it's like, it rains, it's just, it's made it hard, you really gotta react quickly, and you have to have, short-term measures in place, and then we need to plan for long-term measures. That's really what we gotta start doing. We have to change how you do things, and you have to have, you have to plan for the unexpected. It's pretty much the way it is, and it's kind of nerve-wracking, because has anybody else noticed how the weather man is just never right anymore? I mean, no, seriously.
Don't take it on.
Yeah, well, again, the models are wrong, right?
Everything is not, yeah.
It's just, they're doing the best, but the input is changing into these models.
I mean, look, it's February, right? It's February, and I was out plowing yesterday, and I literally couldn't plow a gravel road, because it was too soft.
Wow.
I mean, that's how, it's not even frozen.
Yeah.
And, I've always ice fished, and I always went ice fishing, January 1st, and it was like a tradition, you'd always go ice fishing January 1st. I don't think you can even safely, I mean, I went out the other day, but I don't think you can safely go out on some of the lakes right now, they're not even frozen. That has never happened before.
Yeah.
I mean, something's up, I mean, people who are saying that climate change isn't happening is, they're like,
They don't need to believe in it, it's happening.
Yeah.
Whether you're believing it or not, it's happening, it has no correlation. We have 5 more minutes of Dave, Elder, and then Susan.
This might be kind of a way in the future, broad kind of thing, but is there any way that you've seen where municipalities have tackled the permeable surface thing and gotten more permeable surfaces?
Yeah, so like the MS4 communities, I mean, they're like required to do this stuff by law.
What
part
did
of
you
the
call them,
permit.
MS4?
Yeah, like Portland, I think.
There's, yeah, they're about to expand, so there's currently 30 communities that are, it's just if you're big enough, so it's municipal separate
see.
stormwater, it's like a stormwater measure, it's a
Yeah.
Big towns and
big
cities.
cities, so,
Yeah.
and it's currently 30 towns are under an MS4 permit right now, and it'll probably double within the next year and a half.
Okay.
So we'll see more MS4 communities, meaning more communities required to keep up with this permitting, and part of that is changing, and so working with people like Jeremy to figure out how can we require less impervious cover when a new development comes in, how do we work with
Yeah.
these developers to put in more rain gardens or less parking lots, or if you're gonna put a parking lot, you know.
But I'm
trees.
thinking also,
So,
like educating people that if their backyards are wet, that
Exactly.
that's not necessarily a bad
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah, and I can also answer, I mean, there are places, 2 decades ago, the Lake Tahoe watershed started implementing impervious cover limits per property parcel. So, and again, that was more quality as opposed to quantity, but now it's becoming quantity also, so so it's been out there for a while.
Susan, can we refit some of the areas like the
For sure.
high school parking lot or the middle school parking lot? I mean,
Yes.
are there grants available to do that?
There are, and permeable, putting in rain gardens, porous asphalt, but it's still really expensive to put in porous asphalt, so
it's really expensive.
hard to maintain.
It's hard to maintain, there's only so many people that make it, like, not Ella Bean, but, the Coastal Botanical Garden, they did theirs like that, that was part of their permit. The South Portland, I think, Portland Main Mall did it, they actually installed it, but you can't just sweep it, you have to actually vacuum it. So you gotta have a really expensive piece of equipment, because you don't want the pores to clog up. You want the water, I actually did do some pervious concrete, so the alleyway, I think you know about it, you go down the alleyway. That's pervious concrete, it's going into the pipe and then going into the river.
And it is really pocky, like it's very rough. It's
Right,
very rough, yeah,
right.
yeah.
So, we can do it, we gotta pick and choose the places, but it's more money, it's expensive. We gotta have the right tools and equipment to
But
maintain
like
it.
paving people's driveways, you don't have to use asphalt, you could use those pavers that let grass come through.
Yeah,
Maybe people don't like the look of it.
But to your question, yeah, there's been a lot of communities that have great success stories, even within Maine, that we can definitely piggyback on that.
All right, well, my other quick question, are there a couple of first steps that you would like to see the town take?
oh geez.
I know it's a-
I mean,
but I mean, a couple of things that you really think would be great first steps.
It's like asking a kid what he wants for Christmas.
Yeah.
Cartoons for 4 hours, you know what I mean? I don't think I can focus on just one right now,
Okay.
but. I mean, I think that's what I think that's what you're doing as a group here. You're looking at probably one of the most important things the town has to look at in the upcoming future, and that's how you implement change and make things more resilient to handle climate change. I mean, that's what you're trying to do here.
Right, and then two last questions before we move to the.
You mentioned in this that the right hand, you have a better feeling just because it's got that large spillway on
Just
it.
the heat.
So we never touch the Seabright board. We don't ever have to adjust the gate.
So if you had your, like, I'm thinking East and West Dam, if it had some sort of similar large spillway or other, bypass, perhaps a larger bypass, a 10-foot diameter tube that bypass, and you could actually open up.
I think ultimately you need more space there, and I think that where the actual dam wall is, that should all be a spillway. It should go over the top and then kind of curve down and go into the river from there, making the spillway just much bigger.
Almost get rid of the active mechanisms and let the dam function as a spillway. And
You'd have it for emergency purposes or maintenance or something if you ever had to, but the reality is you really just need a large spillway.
yeah,
You just have this little tiny spillway for all that water. It's really,
what you actually see kind of at Montgomery, when you get a high water event. I mean, the spillway of Montgomery is probably, 150, 200 linear feet? And all of a sudden, if you have 2 feet of water flowing over that, that's a lot of water.
right. I think ultimately, that's probably too high,
Yeah,
you know?
but it can process a lot of water.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But, you know, you got a lot higher water level,
Absolutely, yeah.
which is causing the flooding.
Good, you have one.
My version of Susan's question, so it's not the full Christmas list. But given that you look at this whole thing on a daily basis, are there any first things that we should focus on or that the town should be thinking about?
It's putting people in roles of leadership that understand this stuff so that good decisions can be made, because ultimately, there's a long laundry list of things that need to be done. And any good successful program starts with leadership in place and having the right mindset and being educated about what's going on. And if you don't have that, you can't, you're making decisions based on popularity and emotion, not on science. So I think that's ultimately the reality of it all. You know, you gotta, and you know, it's really about the science. It's really about having people in leadership that understand that. Yeah, that's ultimately what I think is probably the best answer.
All right, thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
thank you.
It's always good to listen to you and have you come.
Well, thank you.
I have the feeling it's not gonna be the last time we're gonna see you.
Yeah.
The dam tour was still everyone's favorite thing we've ever done, so.
We might do it again. All right.
Take them out when it's raining.
I know, we should.
Yeah, I mean, that next significant rainfall, then you can come out with me and I could let you use the mechanism.
There we go.
We'll sign.
We don't have to-
All right, let's move on to our next, so our next conversation is between Allison and Susan about Harbor Park in particular. I don't know how you guys have structured this. I have no idea what the.
We
You haven't structured it. So after the flooding or the storm event last week, Ellen, the co-chair, and I chatted and she asked if we could, you know, change up and include you guys. And there's been a lot of talk about what the library board wanted to vote on and what that meant for, if that impacts this grant at all. And what event occurred and what happened at Harbor Park. And so I thought, just so that instead of a lot of emails and a lot of conversations about town, and so we thought, let's just all sit around a table and talk about what happened at Harbor Park and what's happening next. If that makes sense.
So I also have a bunch of pictures
Yeah.
to show.
Well, I was gonna say your pictures maybe, I was gonna say, basically what happened, sections of the seawall, there was a section of the seawall that did come down with a couple of top blocks. And a couple of top blocks along the seawall came off and were dislodged. And 5 of the benches were also dislodged. And at the moment, the library is trying to make the area safe. We know that we can't rebuild the seawall because it's not gonna last. And we're replacing the caps back on the seawall and replacing the benches to make it safe while a committee is coming together to take a look at future steps. I do have a statement that the library put together 3 years ago about what they wanted to know with the seawall, and I can just, you know, send you a copy of it or I can read it and whatever you want to know.
Whatever you feel is, I mean, this is your session. Okay, if you want to read this.
Well, okay, fine. So this is the statement that, you know, that we put together, the library put together March of 21. And it was in response to the fact that changes may be made to Montgomery Dam or to Harbor Park. And so what we said is, and I'll just read it because at least that way I'm not saying something that wasn't said by. As trustees, we are the stewards of Harbor Park and prime stakeholders in any decisions that affect the park. Any changes to the dam will certainly impact Harbor Park. Environmental concerns, specifically sea level rise, floodwater runoff, and fisheries restoration are important, but not the only considerations in our stewardship of Harbor Park. We will favor designs and concepts that save as much of the park as possible. And while there is a tendency to view the Harbor Park seawall and Montgomery Dam as one project, they are in fact 2 separate issues that may or may not have one solution. Our task as the library, is not to decide on the dam, but to set benchmarks for endorsing any plan for Montgomery Dam. And they talk about the historical aspects of Harbor Park. It is important that Harbor Park be preserved as close to the original state as possible, including the pathways. The historic and scenic value of homestead design cannot be overstated. It is a nationally recognized treasure. And that said, the trustees realize that some land may have to be sacrificed to sea level rise, but wish to keep this to a minimum. The soft or stepped seawall design is a favorite approach that achieves this. And note also that the sluiceway wall and the park end of the dam, parts of the original dam, are integral to the landscaping and structure of Harbor Park and should be preserved. As for social aspects, the Harbor Park is important to all, residents and visitors, and should be ever more user-friendly than at present. Safe enjoyment by all, including young children and those with disabilities, must be guaranteed in any plans for the future. And that was something that I talked about with ADA compliance. Aesthetic, the look of the park is also of vital importance, and our charge is to preserve this too for future generations. Economic aspects, the park, the amphitheater, and library help bring visitors to Camden far and wide, and town businesses benefit. An open decision-making process, we urge the town to actively engage with the public on these matters, to present alternative designs for Montgomery Dam, the mouth of the river, Harbor Park, and the head of the harbor. And then in addition, they ask that all designs should include a depiction of the seawall, that any design should address the area between the ramp and the American Boathouse side of the park. They state that sea level rise is certain and will force modification of the seawall. And based on available data, the trustees assume sea level rise will be 1.5 feet or greater by 2050. We favor a tiered step design that is both aesthetically pleasing and safe for public use. And the dam and harbor park designs, such as those from Interfluve and Midcoast Conservancy, must show the high astronomical tide line with projected sea level rise drawn on them. Designs should conserve the park to the greatest extent possible while reimagining the area with flood resilience and sea level rise in mind. We must build for long-term and plan for long-term maintenance. Any new features must increase the usability and appeal of Harbor Park to the general public. And while it is important that the town consider funding this project through grants, this should not be the determining factor in choosing a design. As this project will likely go to a town vote, we believe it is important that a final design be fiscally reasonable to garner support from the citizens of Camden. As trustees of the library, amphitheater, and Harbor Park, our primary responsibility is to ensure careful, responsible management of these resources. The trustees request that we be invited to all future meetings regarding the dam and be included in all communications regarding Harbor Park and the project. Please send these communications to both the president of the board of trustees and the executive director of the library. And we look forward to being part of the process of addressing sea level rise, possible changes to the Montgomery Dam and Harbor Park, and their future impact on Harbor Park and the So this was a statement that we put together 3 years ago, basically saying that we wanted to be part of it. And I think the hardest thing is we don't, as trustees, we need to know what our relationship is with the town and what our responsibilities are.
Which is not a question we're gonna solve today.
No, I don't
know. It's an ongoing.
But if you have pictures, that would be great.
Hold on a second, Ray, you have a question?
One quick thing.
Yes.
Susan, could you email that to the members of this committee?
Actually, it's on the website. It's on the website.
But I'll make sure everyone has a link.
Okay.
Yeah, I can send a copy, but it is on the website. It is part of the.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
After all that, right?
so,
No, that's you talk.
yeah, so actually, I mean, a lot of work went into getting to the point where they issued that statement. There've been many presentations, many, I think I first presented to the library board about a grant we were applying for in 2019, showed pictures of the degrading seawall. It's, you know, Harbor Park and anything under the library's purview is like this. Actually, can I share my screen?
Yeah, I made you
Is that
a
gonna work?
person that can do that. Let me know
Allison,
if you
we
can.
have 20 minutes for this session, but 5:30 we need to move on to another topic. So both for your presentation and questions.
Let's see here. Um, I'm actually like nervous right now. I'm finding. All right, so. Right. Okay, so one of the things that we learned when we become select board members is that we have no say in Harbor Park. And this is this will go away, this.
Maybe it's just, it's probably on this screen.
Oh,
Just keep going. That's
Okay.
fine, yeah.
that's super annoying. I see it on my screen too, so it must not be, but we'll persevere. So this is the boundary of Harbor Park, and you can see how it, I also have a bunch of this printed out if you want, but it goes right along the building on Main Street, the former psychic shop, along the edge of the dam, and then through the middle of the sluiceway. So, oh, there we go. No. So it's the dam in, Brewer entered the waiting room. The dam is like not only a dam, but also forms the boundary between town property, and it's all town property, between the property that the library has jurisdiction over as part of a deed restriction from Mary Louise Curtis Bach. So when we initially started looking at some different options for the Montgomery Dam and Fish Passage and stuff, it was very clear in everybody's head, like, we're not gonna touch Harbor Park. We wouldn't want to do that because that's a whole different decision-making entity. Next. This is, just shows a picture here of the little bit of flooding. This is not, none of the pictures that I'm actually going to show are from the most recent storm. So this is all just stuff that I could look on a tide chart and I could say, okay, this is the next time you can go and see this. This was actually, I told the library board about this. It was going to be October 28th. I said, I knew the time, said, go down, you can see it at this time. So this is the stuff that's really predictable, that's happening all the time. This is a more detailed look. This issue of who controls all of this space has been going on since Phil Montgomery gave the town the dam. He had written the town and said, hey, I noticed that I have a survey that shows the border between my property and the town property going right down the middle of it. So who's responsible for the liability of this? Who's responsible for the maintenance of the masonry? All of that. Who's, can you help me pay for the costs of repairing the dam? There's a bunch of, if anybody ever wants to look through all the letters from Phil Montgomery, it was interesting because he identified what the issues were and understood them, was upfront with the town, asked to help, for the town to help in the costs of it, and ultimately it ended up being given to the town. But the dam, and I think it's important, what we realized when we started talking to the library board more, is that not everybody's talking about the same thing. A lot of the time we're like arguing theoretically, and we're not all referring to the same thing. So the dam spillway is the concrete portion where exactly where it's labeled. That's the spillway part of it, but the main part of the dam, we learned later, is buried. And so the water used to go down through Harbor Park. Got the sluiceway part here, the seawall. And so initially we thought we would stay, okay, anything to do with the town stays all to the left here, and Harbor Park is to the right. But when you start looking at all of the old records about different repairs that have been made, there are all these times in the past where they found water trickling down through Harbor Park. And that's because it's leaking through the main part of the dam. So you can almost think about the Montgomery Dam as keeping fresh water out of Harbor Park, and then the seawall keeps salt water out. So initially it seemed like a really good idea to just okay, we can't really get into that over there. That would be too radical of a change to think about taking all of that out. But as we realized that sea level rise was already happening and already having such an impact, we started thinking, is it stupid not to address this together? Because we're gonna put all this energy into trying to save this portion here and then have everybody say, you're a bunch of idiots, you didn't plan for sea level rise and this is gonna fall down anyway. So, this is just some interesting stuff about like the history of where, how do we know that the river used to go there? I can send everything to people if they want. There's reference to a blacksmith shop and how the original course of the river was behind the Mansfield blacksmith shop. This is the picture there is showing before the harbor was dredged and that view out to Curtis Island. This is another one that gives more of a sense of what it used to be like. The topography now is really misleading because so much fill has been brought in that the high points weren't the original high points. So you can see really there that whole like, eroded bank is very similar to where the bank is now. Then in 1930, Mrs. Bach, as part of the shorefront improvement project, they asked the Camden Select Board for permission to fill in the section of intertidal zone. They called it a wharf. So that whole part that floods now so often is that infilled area. I think it's also important to remember that, and I didn't realize this at first, but going back and reading a lot, this was part of a long sort of evolution of projects that were not finished. So Mrs. Bach didn't feel like she was finished with anything. The Olmsteds didn't feel like they were finished. There's a bunch of stuff. This is the public landing. That's what that was supposed to look like. Every time she did one project, she went to the library and she said, finish the library, and she looked out and was not pleased with the view. So then she tried to work on Harbor Park, and then things burned down over on the public landing. So there's a bunch of stuff that never got done, actually. That is interesting to look at, I think, and a lot of concessions were made. A lot of the things that are in the plan now were not necessarily what the Olmsteds or Mrs. Bach thought of as the ideal. They were concessions and compromises with the town. So this is one of my favorites from the Olmsted archives, and it shows a panoramic view of what they encountered when they were going to do Harbor Park. And so this is kind of what the bedrock looks like underneath the part that's now buried. A lot of the buildings you can still kind of see them. They're much smaller than they are now. But this is a picture that shows them filling it all in. So this again is that part that fills so much, that floods so much. And you can kind of see that sometimes sand comes out a little bit during these high tide events. So it's not just that there's sea level rise. You also have some amount of sinking here.
Is that the seawall right there?
Sorry. Yes, sorry. So that's the seawall. They're looking down toward that kind of boat ramp type of thing that's there now, which actually was this whole rail system so that the town could pull up their floats. Can you imagine if we said now, I could store some floats and
So people could tip their boats between the bottoms.
Right, and then there's, that whole beach space we have is this magical intertidal zone now that, it was grounding out space for the boats.
Yes.
Because back then you really wouldn't have wanted to touch the water much. This is back from the 2019 presentation. So this was what's already happening as we're starting to look at the Montgomery Dam, starting to think about saving this area, and we're like, oh my gosh, maybe the seawall's not going to hold on as long as we think. And that's just all what's happening now. All these sea level rise scenarios, we know it's getting worse. Even a foot of sea level rise makes a big difference. More of this. So this is where I wanted to try to show a few pictures where I think some of the disagreement is in terms of like, would there be a waterfall? Would there not be a waterfall? Where would the water go? Why are we seeing this differently? What do things actually look like? So this is just looking out toward the harbor. One of the things that a few people have gotten really angry about over the years that I didn't understand at first was the idea that when the town opens the sluice gate, it blasts the dinghy dock system. And also just the whole flow of the river is really focused on this small boat marina. And it causes, problems that wouldn't have been problems back at that time. This is from the 2005 storm, which is really interesting. The cover of the annual report, for the towns, like the year of the floods. And, I wasn't around, I mean, I was around, but I wasn't involved in town government during any of this. I was living in Florida. And so going back and reading, I was like, oh my gosh, wow, it's been really bad before. So this is where a portion of the seawall fell down before. And in reading all of the accounts, it was all blamed on the river, not on the ocean. And I'm sure the ocean had some part of it, but it's like that force of the sluiceway hitting that corner. And then also hit the small boat marina, dragged all these floats down. You can kind of, you can read all about it. I can send this to everybody who's interested in any portion of it. So this shows, sort of like what the approximate historical channel might have been. We'll never know for sure, exactly, probably over thousands of years, it split. There were probably times when the channel went this way or that way, but they've done borings, as part of some of the earlier BANT cycles. They basically know where the bedrock is. And
If you stand at Lyman Morris and look across, you can see that the river really flows in toward the lower end of Harbor Park.
right, yeah, and so, this kind of is supposed to give a sense of the huge elevation difference between the highest part in bedrock and the lowest part in bedrock. So I think this is where there's a lot of people say, well, there would still be a waterfall because water goes downhill. And some people say, well, the waterfall would be gone. Well, there was a waterfall there before all of this. It started back at like the Main Street grades and cascades down pretty steeply. You can find other similar rivers that are going to look kind of like that. But if you only take out the concrete spillway part, you are going to concentrate, and I have a bunch more photos I could show too. The water is going to be concentrated along the outside, a very narrow channel along the outside of the sluiceway. Or you can, because what you'd probably do is you'd say, you'd seal off the gate on the sluiceway or something, and then you just take out the concrete. And you just have it spilling, maybe when you got major floods, you'd have it go over a whole lot more. But overall, you would not have the aesthetically pleasing like, natural waterfall that we can imagine maybe what that would look like initially. And you also wouldn't have the aesthetic benefit of the elongated spillway. So you'd almost have aesthetically, you would kind of have the worst of both worlds. And I think that's where some of the disagreement is, that people that are in those buildings, or they've looked at this a lot, they're like, these people are crazy if they think the waterfall is just going to stay when you take out the dam. It really depends on which part you take out, which part you would modify the bedrock. The main original part of the waterfall is buried, and how much of that can be recovered is not certain. So this may be a case of not being able to put everything back. People talk about modifying bedrock. The bedrock has been modified a lot, but there's just a very big elevation difference. This is just more interesting stuff. There's also, like the Olmsted stuff identified this like spring here. So there's a spring coming out. You can also see, this is all the drainage here, and you can see the drainage channels in Harbor Park today. So that all leads down to that part of the seawall that just fell down. So when they've said putting the seawall back together, just like it is now, is complicated and expensive, and it's just sort of some interesting stuff here.
When you can tell, looking at the seawall, that section has fallen down before, because it looks very different. The mortar in it is very different.
Right.
This section that most recently fell down
Yes.
is also on that point.
So it's in the sort of the bend in the corner where it juts out.
Okay.
And that section looks like it was repaired before, and the mortar looks very different.
Yeah, so
Oh.
it's not one of these seawalls that's designed to be overtopped. It was designed to be a mortar grouted seawall, and the same with different components of the dam. So when water gets on the other side, it's it wasn't designed for that, so.
And there's definitely sections of that seawall that are built better than.
Yes,
other ones.
yes.
I mean, there's some
Still
that have like,
looking at it.
you can tell that some are just like, oh, I can move rocks around and they stack them up. And then there's other ones that I think are actually pinned and probably leaded in place
Yes.
and then have like nice batter and they've been worked and yeah.
There were
Part
also
of it
multiple
too is that the
phases.
tops have come off and have been
Yeah.
replaced just to make sure that they're safe,
Mhm.
so that they hasn't been rebuilt completely. And if you
Right.
look, the seawall is also leaning towards the harbor and not away from the harbor. So
Right,
that's a problem.
exactly, and,
So Alison, I know we can do this for another hour, and you have really cool footage and pictures, but we have an agenda. And I really want people to be able to ask questions.
let me just go through real quick these.
You have 5 minutes, and I really want the committee to be able to
Well,
ask
they can ask me
questions.
questions, can I show them some pictures and then?
Alison, this is not an, I'm sorry, we have an agenda. So, and people want to ask questions,
I'm gonna go through the pictures really quickly because otherwise,
so they won't have
You
time to
also
ask
said that.
questions.
Can you send us?
Can you share it? And can we continue the
I'll-
conversation, because it's a lively conversation, and I don't want to cut that flow.
You know, how much time do you need for the update?
overfishing is another thing that you just wanna think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do 5 minutes, so 5 minutes? Okay, so until 20 of, but let's make sure there's time for people to ask questions.
I can also answer questions in writing later if you want, but, okay, so this is the overfishing. You can see they put the, nets on the seawall here. So this is a really important part of like the working waterfront that not a lot of people see. It's gonna be coming up in March. It'd be great to go down there. They have a lot of different troubles depending on whether the sluiceway is opened or closed. They try to set their nets up strategically. It's, not, that should be considered in a design, like where you could put the overnets, things like that. This is just a bunch of stuff about what Mary Louise Curtis Block said that she would have wanted. She wanted an aesthetically pleasing bridge. She wanted, the buildings to be removed. She wanted us to finish the public landing. So there's a bunch of stuff there. That shows after she was finished. Why would she say that she wanted a more aesthetically pleasing bridge? So she didn't really think this looked great. And it's a big part of the aesthetic problem, that needs to be solved. This is kind of what we like about it now. It's really hard to give this up. This shows the bedrock from the top. So basically the southern channel here, this waterfall here, if you need it to fall from that high of an elevation, it's just going to be very, very difficult. So that part as it is would go away. You can do different things to the bedrock to make the water fall in different ways. This kind of, but to have it do that exactly, it's gonna change if the dam is removed. That's that again. This just shows the bedrock a little bit more, to show the difference in elevation. This is, and I can send this to everybody. This shows MDOT getting the, logs and stuff out. Dinghy dock system. So this would be the main point, I think, that this part here is the part that has a lot of different considerations due to fish passage and how you want to do things or whatever. The other part, closer to the American Boathouse, probably doesn't, that was actually redesigned a couple different times. There used to be a big wharf there. She took a bunch of fill out. You might be able to even think about doing something like, the town also has this problem here where the docks raised when the water comes up and that rips things apart. Those floats go down on the intertidal zone in a way that's not really that great. You might look at, like this is an example of a tiered seawall that could go down and then, maybe there'd be a pier or something that you could build there. So, that might be an opportunity to start doing some of the design in that area, without having to worry about the implications of the river project. So these are some of the designs we did before. We looked at going around that. You kind of have to decide whether you want to modify bedrock or you don't want to modify bedrock. You want to try to keep this part that's been filled in forever or not keep that part that's been filled in forever. So there's a lot to consider, and that's why we really just all have to, I think, talk more and work together, because you really can't have Harbor Park the way it is without something's gonna have to change. We just have to decide what.
And I think the trustees agree with that. They just want to be part of the decision.
Oh, yeah.
That's why
we can't move
and that's
forward until the trustees get more involved. Because there are so many different options.
Yes, I know, but I think in order, the trustees need to be presented with options and then take a look at them and see what works best. Because I think they're open to this.
Susan, do the trustees have ideas of how they would like to be involved, other than just being an audience for what other people come up with?
Well, I mean, we have a harbor committee that is meeting actually on Thursday, again, to decide what to do with this constant repair of the benches and the seawall. And we can't do anything with the seawall because, well, you need permits for one, but also it's just gonna be washed away again. So we need to figure out what is the best way to proceed, what grants are available, how much of the town, I mean, who pays for this? The library obviously does not have funds to pay for it. And that's part of it as well.
So we have a map. I think I would encourage everybody to go back and read the narrative for the NISWIP grant, because it goes through very much, there's a massive amount of funding available to do all of this. And the point of this, I think, is to get to the point where we have something to present to voters and can show multiple options. And the NOAA and NICWIP are very eager for the whole project to be
It should be
combined.
one big project.
Holistic.
And
Yeah,
we
I think that's the
totally
biggest.
agree.
Yeah.
And they
And
said
there's no way that the trustees feel, no, we don't like that, no way, you can't do it. We're looking for direction on what kinds of things are the options. How can we be involved? We don't have the money as trustees to pay for this,
Yeah.
and we need to be part of it.
And that's why that's why we thought having this on the agenda was so important, because I do think that there is a disconnect right now between, the trustees, trying to find money to fix something that we're.
Well,
Yeah, and that's different, and I talked to Mike Burke about it a little bit too, and, I think getting money to fix things now will not impact future grant cycles, and I know that's a big question, so I just wanna lay that out.
well, and my comment to the library trustees, when we asked for some funding
Yeah.
because the park wasn't safe. There were
Right.
a couple of sinkholes, there were a couple of places where the top caps had come off. Benches were lifted up with the bluestones totally underneath.
Yeah.
And so those needed to be replaced. I mean, we had a long discussion as a board meeting, and there were a number of trustees who said, let the wall fall down. I don't care, let it fall down, because anything we do to put it back the way it is not gonna work.
Right.
But letting it fall down is not the way to go either. So
I think there's short-term fixes for now that need to
Exactly.
happen for safety.
So at this point, what
Exactly.
we're doing is putting.
But I think moving forward, the whole point, not the whole point, you have a lot of value at this committee, but I think we really value you being on this committee because of what your stance in the library, and so I think it's very important that you do stay engaged, that you keep us all connected,
Yeah.
because we do want them at the table
Absolutely.
as we go through this process. And not to jump ahead, but part of the next thing that we'll talk about, and we can talk about it via email, and it's nothing new, but is we are gonna do these charrette sessions, especially related to Montgomery Dam, and I think it's very important for everyone to come to let us know what that input is that they would like to see. What would you like to see at Harbor Park? What would you like to see at Montgomery Dam? And let's put it all on the table and see what we can do and see
Totally.
how we can get there. And I think we are lucky that we did have those drawings done by, Stephen Moore folks.
Right.
And then we also have, the very basic ones that Interfluid has done so far, and then that's the whole plan moving forward. So I just wanna put that tidbit
Right,
in there.
and well, as you can tell from our, the library statement, we're open
Exactly.
to anything.
And so I
We
just
just
wanna,
need to be involved.
So it needs to be coordinated also,
Exactly.
because
Exactly.
this whole project, there's a lot of moving pieces.
Totally.
And we do need coordination among each other and talk to each other, so we can come up with a holistic solution.
that's what's so great about having Dave saying, all right, here, it is all connected, and let's find a way
Right.
to stay
Right.
on the
It
same
needs to be
page
a
and move
whole
forward
project
together.
with lots of people involved.
It's, can I say something? It's really easy to lose sight of what this whole grant is for. I mean, I do it too, because I get so wrapped up in what I'm doing, but it's pretty encompassing of just about everything. And if you could probably think about a problem that's associated with the river, this grant is trying to address it. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah,
And
and
it's a
even
good-
with the Riverwalk Committee, we've been chatting with them about how can we, they want a lot of grants too to help with their Riverwalk, like, can we incorporate some of what they want in this grant? There's a lot of ways to be a holistic community in terms of what kind of, funds we can get so that we can move forward as a watershed.
What's the Riverwalk Committee?
Or sorry, the pathways. River-
I was like,
Sorry.
Any questions for Allison and Susan?
Yeah, is there room in this discussion really for some of the, I would call neighboring stakeholders who own property? I'm thinking about the owners of the American Boathouse, which is going to be affected by anything on this.
Absolutely.
And obviously the business owners right above
I know.
Montgomery Dam, because they are going to be impacted more than anybody else by what we decide.
Absolutely,
I
I
don't
think
know-
all
I don't know if their
those
voices are
stakeholders need to be part of it.
So I hope that, I think what might not be getting through is partially the extraordinary nature of the grant funding right now. When we first applied for the first round, no money was available for private property. There was a non-federal match requirement. And now neither of those things are true. So money, it's not gonna last forever. They're trying to incentivize construction-ready projects because they don't want to fund things in the planning phase forever. So the communities that can get out in front and be ready with construction-ready projects, there's a big amount of money available also for private property adaptations. So looking at the fact that all of those buildings are gonna need something at some point, no matter what, anybody can see that. It's an opportunity to all work together. If we could do this and the Montgomery Dam and the bridge project and those buildings, look at that comprehensively, we can avoid having to have that pond drained over and over and over again for different cycles as each project happens. So there's a huge opportunity to have enough money to do what would help everybody. And I hope that message can get to the building owners, because I don't know if that was part of the message at the beginning. And there's maybe some mistrust now, or maybe if they knew that a little bit more.
And that is one of the biggest things that, again, just to piggyback so that this discussion can go till the end, but that's the biggest thing that we're working on in the coming months is making sure that all the abutters, we've worked really hard to do outreach and we're just making sure that everyone is engaged and involved, but we're gonna do very specific targeted outreach with landowners, abutters to help them understand what the options and opportunities are and make sure that they're at the table to help us work through those together.
And take their input or their
Exactly,
suggestions.
a listening
Not
session,
just-
Mrs.
not
Forrest
Just
speaks.
have them listen.
Yes, yeah, no, I think
And
we're
yeah,
trying really hard to listen as much as possible, and I get a lot of emails in hopes that we can continue to create that atmosphere of listening.
Tyler and then Susan, if you don't mind.
Question for Sophie and Allison, as far as, it seems like there's still a lot of gray area as far as roles and responsibilities and ownership and who's paying for what, and where that line is between the town and the library trustees for some of these properties. Is that something that, do you think that'll be resolved to the point where, my concern is I would hate for that to be a bottleneck or a hindrance to recommendations that this committee goes forward with?
There's no confusion as to this stage of grant funding has already been outlined. FB and Interfluve are overseeing all of that and the subcontractors. So any designer and engineer, any consultant, all goes through FB and they work with Interfluve. The construction phase of it, when we get to the point of coming up with a project that is fundable from outside sources, that's where you really want to have like Matt Bernier come in a little bit more. But the message that I've heard is that it's things that achieve the goals as outlined with reducing flood risk for both the river and Harbor Park in a way that maximizes nature-based systems as much as possible. So a little more natural, a little less concrete. That's completely fundable. That NIFWF has said they can commit up to $10 million for multiple sites throughout this project, and then other funding sources as well. So they're not gonna fund everything if you decide, well, we've just decided to raise the seawall 10 feet and build a technical fish ladder to Montgomery Dam. That might not be fundable, but, there's a whole range of things that would be.
So will designs be done that include the whole end of the harbor with the American Boathouse, the library and Montgomery Dam and the owners off to the side? Is that
Yes.
what?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, I mean, that certainly helps us as trustees
Yes.
because, you know, we look at it and our concern was, well, you're sort of on your own to repair
No.
this and
Harbor
that,
Park has always been included in how we're going to look at this, and I think that's one thing that I don't know how to reiterate more
That's great.
clearly, so just yes.
I think it's a question, I think it's probably a question for the next step,
Totally,
the
and
construction aspect.
right.
Cause I know right now, like I think this was part of
but if the
watching
funding is
the.
available if funding is available on the table and we already got buy-in when we did the grant process, then I don't think I think that might,
Yeah.
that question is kind of moot, and it's something that we'll work through with Matt Bernier and the library and the town, but I think the idea is whatever recommendation we move forward together, and then the outcome is that, you know.
Should really have Matt Bernier in to talk about that, like the different types of things that they're
Exactly.
funding and.
Yeah.
He said it's, you really should just be focusing on coming up with something that works and not focusing on the worry about the cost.
Yeah, the reason I bring it up is I watched the library board meeting the other day, and that was,
It was,
the reason that people wanted to let it fall down is they feel it's the town's responsibility because it's the town's property.
Well, I think.
So I think that's the,
So I think we have, I'm sorry.
that's a big,
it's good.
it's a big thing.
It's a good
I
fact,
want you
it's a
guys to
good
be
fact.
aware of it.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah, we should talk about this more instead of tiptoeing around it. That's what's gotten us here. We've been talking about this for 4 years. And there's been not a lot of progress in some areas because we're like, oh, for the last year and a half, I'm not allowed to talk about it because I'm not on the river committee. And so then it's, more people do need to talk about it more in the same room, I think.
Excellent.
And
We're
maybe
gonna
more
stop
like
here.
more.
No, we're gonna stop here.
And I think that brings us to our outreach and engagement plan, which we have 5 minutes to discuss before we open it up to public.
3 minutes.
3 minutes to discuss. But I was able to sneak a lot of it in, so I think we're okay, but, and I know that I did cross some things off on the agenda, which we'll follow up via email, because a lot of it is just to help you guys get the word out more about upcoming events and to sort of report back on different engagement we've done with other committees and other events going on around town, so we'll make sure that that happens, but going through this outreach and engagement plan, some of the upcoming speakers, we're doing less speaker series because we have so much to do in terms of the neighborhood outreach and these listening sessions and charrettes, et cetera. So we're hoping to have someone from the Olmsted Foundation come speak. I've spoken to a couple people. They have this whole resilience group that they're trying to get out more and more of how to make the Olmsted parks more resilient to climate change while still honoring the historical aspects. So I'm hoping that they can come speak to us about that. Yeah, and then I think another session with maybe Matt Bernier sitting around the table with us could be really beneficial, but again, we'll talk about what that could look like. And there are some, Jamie Carter is the sea level rise climate change guru over there, and I know that was something that came up during Dave's talk, so those could be our 3. Neighborhood socials, community events. We have a lot to do. We have a lot going on. We'll schedule everything and work with you guys to make sure that we're doing the proper outreach. We mapped all the abutters along the river that would be impacted from even just a visual impact or a property impact. And so we're making sure that we're going to do targeted outreach to each of them ahead of every event to make sure that we have who needs to be there. And we'll work with you guys to do continued outreach and figure out what space it should be, who should, all the logistics of how to make it work for people to attend. So I'll just stop there, but.
There's a
I
couple,
have one
Yeah,
okay,
please.
okay.
Related to
Yeah,
that, is there a deadline by which time Mike wants suggestions for view shed about where they should be making drawings? I'm thinking in terms of those gatherings. We
Yep.
want to have the drawings, but by what time do we have to submit those suggestions?
So it's good. Let me do a little more back and forth with Mike to figure out what the next step is in terms of getting a landscape architect and who is gonna do it and what the task is. And then hopefully we can get that ball rolling really quickly but we still need to do a couple more logistic things there. a good question, thank you.
And one quick question
Yeah.
on the Main Street Bridge.
Yeah.
How will that affect anything with the Montgomery Dam or any of those?
So that was another, we have someone from Maine DOT, so they gave a presentation at the, what do you call the, I keep calling it the Riverwalk Committee.
The path.
Pathways, sorry, pathways. Maine DOT and the Pathways Committee had a joint, you were there, right?
I was, yeah, I'm waiting for the connection to the.
Well, Jeff Scott thought it was very helpful in terms of understanding what DOT wanted out of, I guess maybe I'm misunderstanding the connection.
Oh, no, I don't know if that guy would be the best, traffic calming person, might not be.
Okay, so you're gonna get back to us on this.
Yeah,
question,
'cause I do
because I
think
don't
that
think
the
we can
main-
answer it in like 30 seconds.
But I'm sure that whatever changes are made to the Main Street Bridge
Yeah.
will really
Yeah.
affect any designs that
Absolutely.
yeah.
Put and give input more than asking for that.
Yeah, we
Alright,
tried to get that input. Sorry.
Okay, I'm gonna close this, because, you know, we have made a commitment to let the public ask questions, so members of the public, do you have any questions? And I really insist on questions, not statements, but questions relating to the topics we addressed today, during our work with the community.
I may,
2 minutes, yeah, we have a.
We'll start the time.
Yes, and Ken, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ken Gross, and I do need to say that I'm speaking on my own behalf. I do work at the library, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the library. We have a library representative here.
And 2 minutes for a question, Ken, please.
Okay. I just want to recognize that I'm in a bubble of like-minded people. You are all in a bubble of like-minded people. And I just want to maybe reach out and to speak bubble to bubble.
Let our bubbles collide.
So that, to keep because talking is important in this small town. So to just establish a baseline of where my bubble is at is that the loss of, and I'm speaking particularly about Montgomery Dam and its waterfall, would be a colossal loss to this town. And people would be heartbroken if we were to lose the dam and the waterfall.
So Ken, I'm sorry, I understand your comment. Do you have a question for the committee?
I would like to keep the conversation going, and the question, hang on just a moment. I'm wondering if there's going to be an earnest evaluation and comparison of costs and benefits, because right now I can see the huge cost if we lose Montgomery Dam, but I don't see a comparable enormous colossal gain to the town of Camden. And I think we need to have that conversation. And my question is, are you going to engage in an earnest cost benefit analysis, weighing all kinds of values, not just one kind of value, not just your favorite kind of values, but the values that the townspeople have? So that's my question. Is that part of the plan? And I think I heard you refer to it.
Yes.
But I'm also wondering,
No,
in your.
One at a time,
One at a
please.
time, yeah.
One at a time.
The quick answer to that is yes, you're also at 2 minutes, but I'll let you finish that question, your next question.
No, well, I don't know your term charrette, but I'm not sure there's time enough between now and November, if that's the deadline to have design presentations, go back and redesign based on what your feedback is. That's what I understand is a charrette or as a feedback session. There should be some built in so that you get response from the people of Camden and get to change your.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna cut you off.
Yeah,
Just
that's fine.
to be equity. But yes, I hear that, and we're working really hard to figure out how to fit it all in, and as soon as we can get that plan in place, we'll make sure that everyone has the schedule, and the idea is that we will have, especially for Montgomery Dam, and, you know, there's a potential vote or a planned vote in November. So what do we need to do to make sure that everyone has their voice heard and that we have some options on the table we are planning to do more of an economic analysis in terms of so many different things. There's a lot of factors.
It's not just an economic analysis.
No, I know, I meant to for your first one, but yes, yeah. The answer is yes, and we're doing our best, and we've worked really hard over the last year and a half to get people to show up and engage and communicate, and I think we've done a good job of listening. I've spoken to most of your committee a few times, and we hope to continue to do more of that. And we look forward to having you at those stretch sessions and working with you, because I do think you have some great ideas, and I'm excited to work together to figure out what we can do.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Bina said, these charrette sessions, will be designed in part to be able to respond pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So maybe your views, you know, a typical charrette, if you've been to one, there's a long lag period after, that's not the intention,
No.
correct?
It's gonna be a very quick iterative process to make sure that we can work together.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. Do we have anyone on Zoom that want to ask a question? Because I know we had Robin and.
There's another gentleman behind you too.
And Tony, you have a question?
No questions.
No questions, okay.
Take my time to decide.
Just, let's double check. You said we're open to public. Anybody on Zoom or YouTube? I don't know which way.
How do we know?
How do we know?
They could raise their hand, they could.
They have to raise
Is there
their hand.
anything, put it in the chat box too?
Yeah, I saw Chris
Chris,
chatted with us earlier.
At the very beginning, so I think we're good there.
all right, so we have another 8 minutes or so. So any other questions from the committee to Allison, to Saint-Laurent, to Bina, to Forrest, to Susan?
Yeah, I had a question to maybe Susan, I guess.
So Ellen and then Deb, please.
Yeah, listening to the statement that you read from the library, it sounded like, there ideally wouldn't be alterations to the park. Or as much as possible not, but then looking at the maps of the river's natural path, it seems like there could be significant alterations to that piece, and so I'm kind of curious how that looks from the end of the library. Is that something that would be, be coming up against, that that's not something that's ideal to the library, or is that something that's within the scope of?
Well, I think
Reasonable.
because it's on the historic register, at least the amphitheater is, and because we are the trustees of the lower part of the park, Harbor Park, the ideal thing was to keep it as close to what it was originally. However, we all recognize that with sea level rise and with what's been going on with the seawall being knocked down and the benches being moved, that changes are gonna have to be made. And that in many ways, people may enjoy Harbor Park in a different way than when it was first envisioned. So there's a group of us that'll meeting on Thursday, and we'll go over this statement again and take a look at it and see what options we have open. I mean, I think one of the concerns also is that the wall of soil or the embankment along the side of the dam really is held up by the dam. And if the dam is taken down, does that whole embankment go away? I think the historic part of the dam was part of it as well, but I think, I look at it and I think, well, people enjoy the low tide lines. If you watch the kids that are down there, they enjoy the low tide lines, and maybe we need to consider what is a park? And that's why it's good to talk to Olmsted
Yeah,
and say,
I think
what is your vision now for a park? It's a place that people enjoy, it's a quiet spot, and if you can sit perhaps on a step back wall and enjoy that lower area rather than a grassy area, maybe that's fine too. Because that's not something that he envisioned when it was first built.
My follow-up would be that I would think it would be really important for the library to be engaged in. And if somebody from Olmsted Legacy is coming to talk. Then having that be more fluid in terms of what is it? How do you maintain the legacy and address?
And we have, trustees who say, just let the wall fall down. Well, obviously, that's not the best way to go either. So there needs to be something, and that's why we reformed this committee, to take a look, what are the next steps that can make it more resilient? What are the steps that will comply with Olmsted, or at least fit in his visions? And, you know, how can we move forward with that? And can we make changes that are better, maybe ADA compliant, maybe other things as well?
Then
So we're open.
Before I hand it over to you, Susan, would you update the committee regularly, like at every meeting of those conversations? Because you're a key, a member.
This committee.
Yes, please.
Yes,
Of
absolutely.
those discussions and.
Right. And I go back to the board, the library board, every month and tell them what we're doing as well. So at least they have an idea of what we're talking about, where we're going.
And I know you do a great job, because I participate in this board and I couldn't.
My
last time.
term ends in July, but I've told them that I will stay on at least to the end of the year as a liaison. Which is wonderful.
That's wonderful.
Deb?
No, I'm done.
She's good. All right. Allison, you get 2 minutes.
I'll take 2 minutes time. I don't need 2 minutes. I was just wondering, is the library gonna do any public input on your own, or, I think that building committee part is gonna be, or the park committee or the harbor committee is gonna be key, because, if you define the hard boundaries and soft boundaries, things that you're open to change versus things that you're not open to changing, it's so far what it's been interpreted that you're open to changing, like the step seawall part and things like that. But actually the main part of the dam is the part that you're not open to changing. And so I think
Like dam, is the dam part, I think as trustees, we felt that the dam was not part of our property. And so therefore, any changes that were made to the dam was not something that the trustees would, but if it affects the property that abuts the dam, and there's the problem.
So I think.
So that's.
you gotta dig into that part a little bit more.
Exactly.
Exactly, we need to have, and that ties back to Tyler's question a little bit earlier, understanding what part of the property and how can we work around it. Dave, you wanna
Yeah, I
come
mean,
in on that?
I'll
1 minute.
offer up a session to go down there, once you kind of iron that out, to go and stand there and physically look at it, because I don't think you really can understand it until you're standing right there. You really are talking about it abstract.
Exactly.
If you're standing there, then you can really see kind of all of this information, it kind of is more easily understood, and you can't really fully understand it until you're standing there.
Right,
So
well, and I think also too,
Yeah.
having, I mean, Allison just gave me this, at least looking at the property lines.
Right.
Where are the property lines?
Right, and then-
What is Harbor Park?
And then physically go down there and go, all right, this is where the line is, like knowing where that is gonna help you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Excellent.
And real
Alright,
quick, so tomorrow is the fishtails thing, Seth is on the panel, which I think should be great. I think if you can go in person, you should. If you can join Zoom, you should. Next week is out.
Thursday.
Sorry, yeah, Thursday. What is, and then next Wednesday, is, I met with all the folks that are gonna join our river restoration roundtable. They're all very excited. So we have someone from the Bagaduce, Exeter River, Long Pond, Somes Pond, and Walton Mills Pond. And so they're, yeah.
Okay, I have a question about that. Are they gonna be physically there?
Yes,
or like-
yeah.
So far, the guy from Exeter might join virtually, but the other three are all planning to come in person. They're very excited. They've all had, I asked them this morning about if they were able to talk about like property rights and issues and, that type of thing. They were, like, yes, we all went through that. We can talk about, so they all went through very similar process that you're all going through. And I think that they will have a lot to tell us, teach us, and I'm excited to have that conversation. So please come with questions. If you have some that you want me to ask specifically, send them ahead. But the idea is that they're each gonna give up to 10-minute presentation about their watershed and what happened in terms of their river restoration project. And then I'll facilitate some questions and we'll open up to everyone else. So please come. I'm excited.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Is there a bookmark?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we made beautiful
have them.
bookmarks.
We have them.
We dropped some off at the library.
They'll go fast because they'll stick them in every book that, you know,
Exactly.
they.
Will
have
you make sure they do that?
And
Thank you.
let's circulate them, so everyone takes a.
Actually, let me see a couple for, I want to do them.
So how many can we have? I mean, the library will stick one in every.
Will
book
they
that goes
actually?
out.
Because we dropped a few off there, but.
But they will stick one in every book that goes out, and there must be 100 books that go out every day.
Yeah, right. We can print more, they'll take it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then if people will put these up around town, please take some. I gave a couple to the library, but that's the only place that I had time to go to.
Last thing, when is our next meeting? Because we truncated the schedule a little bit, so.
Yeah,
when
so
the-
probably not a February meeting because there's 3 things happening in February, so the next one will be in March, and Janice has asked that we move it to Wednesdays. So I'm gonna send out, I know, there's a
Oh,
lot,
no.
I know.
I know.
So there's a
So
lot.
I didn't say yet. I didn't
Nothing's
confirm.
final.
Nothing's final. I'll send out this via email, because it'll be a lot easier than rushing through.
Next Wednesday will be recorded.
Next Wednesday will be recorded, but comment is. No, I know.
So I need somebody to adjourn this.
Move to
meeting.
adjourn.
Move to adjourn. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good job, Sophie.